All right. Well, welcome everyone. I think we can get started. Thank you for sharing. Well, welcome to the second community conversation for the Afrofuturism Collective. My name is Benta Dixon, and I am the program facilitator for the collective. Um, and who is the Afrofuturism Collective? We are a project through the Together for Birds initiative with the American Bird Conservancy. And it's a beautiful segment of ABC's work that has fellowships for diversity and justice and also does seed grants and is invested in and curious about widening the circle of folks who are considered experts and who engage in environmental justice and conservation work. So, one of the things that has been beautiful about engaging with the collective has been that my definition of Afrofuturism has expanded and evolved. I see Afrofuturism now as both the reaching back and reaching forward. Instead of focusing solely on technological advancement, Afrofuturism can be seen as an invitation to redefine technology to include practices and ways of knowing found across the African diaspora that have been preserved for ages, and braid into these practices new understandings, ideas, and dreams. So, this conversation is an attempt at that. And one of the questions that we've been working with as a collective is who is seen as an expert, leader, and wisdom keeper in the space of conservation and environmental justice? And one of the things that for me, for my project, because each of us has an individual project, I focus on young children and families by writing a children's book. And that was important to me because I believe that all care work is connected. And when we're doing the care of young children, caring for young children, we are doing environmental justice because we cannot preserve the earth without preserving the joy and the freedom of young children, of educators, and of families. And so, with that, I would love to introduce our wonderful leaders in our panel today. And so, how we'll do this is I'll ask you, and also I'll stop and say, if you're here, welcome. Please put your name, where you're from in the chat. I really want to hear from you. We want this to be a space where we can connect with each other, support each other. So if you have a business, if you have links, if you have works that you're things that you're working on, please share that with us in the chat. We want to build together through this collective and through this work. So I'm going to have the panel actually introduce themselves with a question, which is, introduce yourself in any way that feels good for you, and then share one thing that comes to mind when you think about joyful and free futures for children across the African diaspora. And that can be from your own experience as a child, your inner child too, or it could be children that you work with. Um, you have free range with that question. And yes, if we can have someone volunteer to start and then please pass it to the next person.
Yeah, I can start. Good morning, or afternoon, wherever you are. I'm Ashley Brailsford. I'm the founder of Unearthing Joy, and we create culturally centered nature experiences. And so that usually looks like with young children, and I've been moving into doing some work with middle schoolers, which is challenging me, that age group. But they've been great, and we do workshops with educators and just community leaders in general. I use educators loosely because it can be people in all backgrounds and knowledge, and consult on different projects. But when I think about freedom and joy for children, I'm sitting on family land right now in South Carolina on a farm that my grandparents and great grandparents stewarded. And I always think about when I would visit down here, me and my cousins, the joy of just having an abundance of time to run around and be free and not having gadgets. And my son has those things too. I have an 11-year-old, but we found things to do. And so the joy of just exploration, wander, and wonder, and having the opportunity to engage in that, the opportunity to be bored, I think is what I think of joy for children and just space in that. And I'll pass it to Alicia.
Thanks so much, Ashley, and hello, everyone. My name is Alicia Hardy. Excuse me, I am the Vice President of Policy and Research at the National Black Child Development Institute, where our national office is located in Silver Spring, where I'm not far from, in Temple Hills, where I am raising with my husband our two beautiful, amazing Black children. NBCDI is the only national organization focused on the unique assets and strengths and needs of Black children birth through age 8 and their families. And we firmly believe that every Black child across the African diaspora is born full of wonder and joy, beauty and genius, despite being born into a world that doesn't always honor this truth. And what comes to mind when I think about a joyful and free future for Black children across the African diaspora is the ability to honor those truths. And the way that we do that in BCI is through our 8 essential outcomes for Black child development. We see the first 8 years of a child's life as a critical period of growth and development, as the bedrock upon which the rest of their lives are shaped. And we see the necessary foundation, these 8 essential outcomes that provide the future and present that they deserve. And those 8 outcomes are that every Black child is born at a healthy weight, they have access to clean air and clean water, healthy meals with vegetables, they live and play in safe communities, attend schools and childcare settings that affirm and expand them, that they have access to safe and appropriate internet and technology. They have books and toys that reflect who they are and can be, and they are seen and treated as a child. And so those through NBCDI are our 8 essential outcomes that we really see as a foundation for a joyful and free future for every child across the African diaspora. And so with that, I am going to actually drop a link to our 8 essential outcomes, and I'm going to pass it to Megan.
Hi, y'all. So my name is Megan Elfrey. I'm currently an assistant professor of, get ready, it's a long title, Racial Linguistic Justice and Early Childhood Teacher Education at Erickson Institute in Chicago. So we are an institute of higher education, really focusing on early childhood education, child development. More than that, though, I'm a daughter, specifically of Southwest Louisiana, raised between Opelousas, Louisiana, Plaisance, Louisiana, by way of North Texas, the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But I currently reside outside of Chicago. When I think about this question of joyful and free futures for Black children, I think about my own sons. They're outside of my realm of early childhood now. They're 15 and 13, but what comes to mind is just deep-seated laughter. And what I mean by that is laughter that kind of extends, it's like that belly laugh, right? That extends from a place of just being able to be and exist. And so not in a response to pain or oppression, but simply the right to exist in your fullness and wholeness. And with that, I'm going to pass to Sabine.
Good morning. Thank you, Megan. This is so delicious. Deep-seated laughter. I love it. Opportunity to be bored. Oh, gosh. So glad to be here. Sabine Thomas from JSOL Studios, and I'm joining you from the land of our Puyallup cousins, as well as a space that has been built on the back of African-American ancestors who, for the most part, migrated from the South to support railroad and airplanes here in the Pacific Northwest. So I want to make sure that I provide some labor acknowledgement as well in this space. I think of the opportunity to move. I took my first breath on the African continent, and my parents' ancestral land is from the Caribbean, and I've had the pleasure to move around, and I wish that for a little one without a passport. That freedom to journey across the Atlantic, to reach ancestral lands, the freedom to move across the United States as well as South and Central America, and just to really be seen. That's what I wish. So I'm glad to be here, and thank you. And I'll pass it to Mike.
Blessings, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I'm coming off a wisdom teeth surgery, so I'm struggling a little bit. So I can open up my mouth a little bit, but I hope to enunciate a little bit better. My name is Mike Brown. My pronouns are he, him. I am an early childhood educator. I work with infants and toddlers. I'm about to be with them in a little bit after that. So my heart is filled. My heart is racing to be back with them because it's been 3 to 4 days. But when you do early child education, you have a million different titles. You just don't do one thing. And so I'm also a coach, a consultant. I have my own podcast, which I'll drop the link in a little bit. That's from the perspectives of two male educators of color who, and my homeboy Nick Terones is also Shumash Mexican, and he also works with toddlers. So I'll drop that in a little bit. But thinking about this question, I went straight back to my mom. And so my mom had her own in-home childcare practice growing up, which is where I grew my love for early child education. And she used to do this practice. Now, I think I do it better than her. We'll debate on that. We'll fight over that. But she used to ask the children, not who do you want to be when you grow up, but who do you want to be today? And all the children will look at her and they now look at me and they go, Mike, what the heck are you talking about? Like, I want to be Eric. I'm Eric today. This is who I am. But eventually they start to understand, like, oh, I want to be a good friend, or I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be a bus driver. And then now we go in our practice, and whenever we see that, we don't yell it across the room, but we go up to that black boy, we go up to that black child, we go up to that black or brown child and go, hey, I see you, right? I see you moving these blocks and manipulating these blocks. And right now, you're not going to be a bus driver in 20 years from now. You're a bus driver right now. Your dreams are being realized right now. And so that advice and that practice, that stuck with me, especially now working with all sorts of communities here on Turtle Island. And I'm coming to you from the traditional lands of the Kumeyaay tribe, which is now known by colonizers as San Diego, California. And so when days get heavy, when systems feel slow to change, when families carry wounds too deep for quick fixes, when it feels like everything is out of my control, I go back to those roots. Who do I want to be today? Who do I want my families and children to be today? And I find ways to just slow down and connect. And so when I choose to be a good friend or a leader, I remember that this isn't just about meetings or plans or getting through an agenda, but it's really about carrying culture and care in my body. It's a reminder that I carry my ancestors and we come from Antigua. So I see you, queen, out there, my Caribbean queen out there. We're going to connect later. But it's a reminder I carry my ancestors with me everywhere I go, 7 generations of them. And so when I feel overwhelmed, I breathe into that connection. When I'm happy, I scream for joy. Not right now, but because their win is my win is their win. And our collective win is your win. And your win is my children and my family's win. And so whether I'm making space for those small victories, whether that's child who finally wakes up in the middle of their nap time to go to the bathroom, hallelujah, right? That male educator who finds his voice, that family that finally feels seen, these moments refill my spirit. And so widening, strengthening, and sustaining all of that means balancing the head with the heart, the urgency with the patience. It means remembering that I'm a part of a lineage, a community, and a future. And sometimes it just means that we just need to slow down enough to hear the land, to hear the water, and to hear our own heartbeat again.
Thank you, Mike. And I'll ask Megan, actually, who has not introduced themselves? Is that everyone? Did we get everyone? Okay. Well, thank you all. And I'm sitting in the presence of just that call in for returning to right pace with ourselves and thinking a lot about time, patience, and everything you all shared about joy, the deep-seated laughter, the space. of course, clean air, clean water, connecting with our ancestors, connecting with ourselves. There's so much that can happen when we think about the future today. And many of in our traditions in the African diaspora, time is not a linear thing. It's actually very circular. So when we think about something reaching back to the ancestors or reaching forward, we're also thinking about our particular relationship in the moment to both of those descendants and to ancestors. And I feel like all of you all talked about these practices of joy, thinking about the future in the present moment. And so I'd love to kind of play with that and think about liberatory practices and think about Afrofuturism from the perspective of like it's happening now. So we don't have to wait we're creating the future, yes, but we're also all of your work is building a future that is joyful and it's happening now. So I would love for each of you to talk about what aspects of your work do you feel like contributes to liberatory practices and what in your work is lighting you up right now? Um, and yes, just to everyone who is here with us, we're going to have some time for like open conversation as well. I want to hear from all of you here and your perspectives too. And feel free to answer any of these questions too when we go there. But I would love to hear from the panel here something about your work that feels liberatory for you in this moment. Yeah.
I'm happy to get us started. Something that is liberatory to me in the work right now is applying Afrofuturism not just as a concept or an ideal, but as an actual tool. We are using Afrofuturism right now in our work to reimagine what research looks like. How is Afrofuturism touching what research means? It means that going back to what you said of drawing from the past as well as bringing us towards the future, research is essentially a narrative, a story. And how are we taking ownership of storytelling, of narratives through research, through reimagining the rigidity of research and leaning into the ways of knowing that we have, understanding the community voice and the stories that we hold that allow us to shape not just the future, but the present. Afrofuturism being such a critical tool to detach us from the present limitations of what exists, how we're told things have to happen, what research has to look like, how information is shared, how it is shaped, who it comes from, and who owns it. Afrofuturism is such an exciting tool to be able to unlock the possibility of what has been, what we are now, and where we are becoming, and drawing all of those pieces together. And so one way that we're reimagining research is really how using Afrofuturism as a tool, I find exciting. I'm a little bit of a research nerd, is that we're infusing art into our research. How are we using storytelling? How are we using and moving beyond focus groups and simple ideas of sitting around and asking questions that are very rigid, but how are we painting in a collective? How are we using music and movement to release the tension from our bodies and allow us the space and autonomy to tell those true stories, to have the comfort and the safety in those moments where it's data collection is not just a survey or a checkbox, but it's deep conversation, it's communal, it is comforting to release those stories and not just to release them, but to gather them in a way that builds towards the future that we imagine. So that's something that really excites me. Yeah.
So, Alicia, as one research nerd to another, um, I think what you said really resonated with me. So, colleagues and I, really friends and I, right, got together and we're preparing to write this really large proposal for a grant. And we were like, well, we want to focus on Black children's world making through this Afro-futuristic lens. And what does it mean for us as adults coming into this work, right, alongside children? And so I think as I think about liberatory practices from the research perspective, we thought a lot about both and, right? So in one of our discussions, we talked about putting aside some of the limitations that we have as adults, some of our own traumas, right? Especially when we're talking about world making, So there are ways in which we've experienced the world and we've experienced harm in the world that we can carry with us in our interactions with our young people. And so we wanted to, first of all, name that. We wanted to take off this this hat of protectionism, right? So thinking that, well, we as the adults are the knowers and we're preparing children to kind of cultivate their own freedom dreams. Children already has their own freedom dreams. And I think, Mike, you touched on this in your introduction, right? Our children are already interacting with the world in a way where they're cultivating their own dreams. So how can we kind of step aside, right, as the adults in their lives? I'll give the metaphor of talking to my cousin who actually just moved back home as well and starting this homesteading journey. And he's having this discussion with my dad and my uncle on whether he's going to till or do no till, right, as his farming kind of method for agriculture. And for me, it was this idea of, well, do I want to kind of disrupt um, the soil that's there and break that apart, right? In order to kind of cultivate and fertilize to create and grow something new. Um, or am I going to go the no-till route of really just pouring into what's there, right? Because the no-till route actually provides a way for there to be less erosion for the soil that's there. So when thinking about what that looks like from an Afrofuturistic lens in our engagement with our children, we talked about, do we leave behind some of those ancestral wounds and some of that trauma that we know we're carrying with us, right? Or what things do we want to bring with us? And we decided, instead of having this very dichotomous view of whether you're going to bring stuff with you or whether you're going to leave it behind, it's always going to be a both. So we carry ourselves in fully, both with our ancestral wounds and our ancestral knowledge, but we also know that on top of that, something beautiful is growing. So I think in my own work, it fleshes out from that research perspective and then from the perspective of how to cultivate those communal stories that we are bringing in.
There's so much there. And it actually made me think about specifically with the thinking about agriculture and the no-till method and how we're working with everything that's there, right? And we don't want to romanticize everything about our past, our collective trauma, our ancestral traumas, our family challenges, but we work with what all of that's there and bring forward, looking at it, bringing forward the gems, but also being really honest and really delicate with ourselves and with our families, with our communities around this. And so I think that to me is a part of care, right? Being able to be with everything that comes up. And I think nature is such a beautiful teacher for that. And I think about for myself, like that has been one of my biggest teachers is being with my mother as when she was my teacher. She also had a program, and it was a nature-based program as well. We spent a lot of time outside and thinking about how I learned many lessons about responsibility, about not squishing a bug. Like, why is it that I'm not going to squish this bug, right? Like, what relationship do I have to this land? What responsibilities do I have to this land and to this other creature? And thinking about also, I wanted to pick up on the thread of weaving research into our cultural practices of art, of story making, of world building. These are not separate things, right? I think sometimes we can get into our silos as advocates, as educators, scientists, researchers, but we are all doing work that enriches each other. And so that's one of the reasons I was really excited to bring this particular group together. And because we have kind of this cross between folks who are working with children in the classroom, and then who are people who are thinking about the broader implications of how we continue that.
Binta, can you say the original question again? Because there was something there that I wanted to connect back to as well.
Absolutely. The original question was, what about your work do you connect to both liberatory practices and Afrofuturism? So, how can we use Afrofuturism in our work to guide us in liberatory practices?
Yeah, I was thinking of it and how I've started to take on work, right? And what work I choose to. Um, so, I think for many people in 2020, many of us received messages around, we need to be rethinking what we're doing here, right? And taking care of our communities and how are we doing that for ourselves? And so, I used to work for a national nonprofit, and it was like a lot of work, a lot of, fast movement, fast paced grants, all the things, right? And so a part of starting Unearthing Joy was to knock against that and to say, what does it look like to create an organization that has a flow that mimics seasons of abundance and seasons of dormancy, right? Seasons of bloom and being okay with that. And I think that's part of my, for my own liberation first before I even get to children. It was like, how do I free myself from feeling like, I got to chase something all the time? And because that spills into the work we do with children and families too, right? It's always like, what's the impact and what's the this and what's the that? And it's like, okay, yeah, right. So this idea and this ability to be okay with when projects sunset. I let a couple sunset this year that had some promise to continue, but um, the way in which, the original funder set it up wasn't, how I wanted to proceed with that project. And it was okay to be able to walk away from $50,000 for that project remaining when it was supposed to be 100,000, by the way. And so, and being like, sorry, you didn't hold your end of the deal, we're done here, and like not panicking, right? Like being like, okay, like that's okay, right? Being okay with now, we move on. I'm meant to move on to something else. And so I think that's a big part of that a practice I'm growing into and becoming more comfortable with is okay with the no, especially if it's not feeding what you had envisioned as a part of that liberation for children or that programming, because that's what it was going to support. So if it's not there on the front end and baked into the foundation, like I don't want it, because what's the outcome going to be, so yeah, I think we have to think about what those liberatory practices are for ourselves and how they show up and what we say yes to before we even think about for children too.
Ashley, I'm so glad you brought that in. Like that really lit me up in so many ways because I'm in also a similar learning process of what are the ways that I want to work in the world and how does that reflect liberation, right? When we think about our work in environmental justice, the things we say no to, the boundaries that we have in our work, are they aligned with the way that we want to live? And in my work working with educators, I remember doing this workshop and it was about play. But it wasn't about play for like children or like play. It was for like, how do you like play in your own life? Like, how do you continue that? And folks were deeply uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable with that. And all the examples would like defer back to children. And so, and I just noticed, I didn't, there was no really wrong answers there, but I just noticed like, wow, like even with myself as an adult, sometimes I can get into this rigid space around time, around what it means to be a professional and all of this like polishedness. And there's a place for rigor, and that's not the same thing as performance. And so I am I am giving myself a lot of grace in that space and working that into my process of bringing Afrofuturism into my work and offering that to the educators and advocates I work with because it definitely does translate into our work with children, especially young children, but all children, because they see they're looking toward us for models of how to be in the world and what kind of movements in their body is okay. And so I'm thinking a lot about how what I hold in my body as professionalism and even how certain words like conservation sit in my body and what that means for this work. So thank you so much for that. That opened up some space for me. Anyone else?
I have to share how just incredibly grateful again I am to be and honored to be in this space because um, Dr. Sister Ashley and I actually have been in conversation around this, and it's just been so important for me to not only hear it from her, but to also witness her going through it and living it. So I just have to say thank you, first of all, Ashley, to just be reminded of that space of freedom to be able to say, no, thank you, not today, and likely not in the near future, and be okay with it. Um, your original question, Binta, I had two thoughts that came to mind. Um, and the first one was freedom of movement that I shared, and the other one was presence, which Brother Mike just so beautifully anchored us around, right? Being here, in the present. And part of our program is supporting community-based parenting. So we engage around conversation and I co-created, I want to say, nothing happens alone. It happens in community. Co-created this kind of 4-part series around herbal mindfulness. And so last week, our topic was around play. Vinta, everything that you've shared. It was so interesting to talk a little bit more about our languages of play and hear how parents and caregivers are being reminded of their playfulness, whether or not they even remember, but also what does it look like to be able to share this with our little ones. And tomorrow, my topic of conversation is actually going to be around breathing, breaths, really being in the present, remembering to breathe and understanding that there actually are multiple types of breath. The language that I use, because it's currently what's being used, is regulation and co-regulation. But the joy and the liberatory practice is, at least for my son and I, is to have dance parties. So he plays his jam, I play my jam. And let me tell you, we co-regulate because we have to breathe. We co-regulate, and it is so freeing because he has the opportunity to hear across the diaspora and to learn a little bit more about what and how I define music. And he's introducing me to his to his choices, right, of music. And so these are a simple moment to be in the present and to be in the now, and just to anchor ourselves around that joy and that breath. And I will loop back around by saying that in preparation for our time this morning, I know that we have really embraced our space of dreaming to be our ancestors' wildest dreams. And I think of not just my son, but really our village children. And I want to be part of my descendants' wildest dreams, right? When I think about Afrofuturism, is really having the opportunity to have that joy, the sparkles when they think a little bit more about us and really have in the moment today be their wildest dreams. So this conversation is just bringing so much joy, and I wanted to bring us in the space of what we know about who we are as a people of African descent and the power of music and drumming and storytelling and beats. And that's our liberatory practice. It's to jam.
As I'm listening to all of this, my mind is firing in so many different directions. So hopefully I can get it all together. But I want to start by saying, obviously, Afrofuturism invites us into imagining beyond survival, right? Into wholeness, into joy, into possibilities. And it's not just about sci-fi or distant futures. And I think Benta and all y'all kings, queens, and non-binary royalties on the call shared that. And you also shared that it was about reclaiming the past, reimagining the present, and just radically dreaming new futures that's rooted in our Black cultural wisdom. And so as we think about this question about how can Afrofuturism guide us towards practices that liberates both ourselves and the children we serve, so what might that look like? I don't got the answers, right? I don't got the answers. And my therapist would love to hear that I said that, right? Because she's always like, you know what, Mike, you don't need to always have all the answers. And also, if you don't have a therapist, highly recommend y'all better use those benefits if you got it. Get out your PTO. Yeah. Okay. Y'all with me. All right. Y'all feel me. But I share that because I'm here to just offer kind of ideas of ways in which we can walk away with some, as well as some things that are coming up. So I think what's sitting with me right now is, what if education wasn't only just about knowledge acquisition, but we view it as a sacred process of liberation, of cultural memory, and self-determination? What if we treated learning as essentially a portal, one that allows children and obviously ourselves to connect with our ancestral wisdom, while simultaneously imagining these bold, new, um, for better or for worse, technologically grounded futures? And so Afrofuturism is inviting us to develop these tools that are more than just functional, but are essentially are soulful. And I know we're living in an AI world now, but I'm just imagining, what if AI in our assessments and our platforms and our research and our apps, everything that we use, they blend those African histories, folklores, speculative futures. Now, I'm not saying we need to turn every early learning early learning environment into the next Microsoft or Apple. They're not paying me. I don't know why I named them, but into a tech hub. But what I am saying is that white people will absolutely capitalize on this and create more harm for us. And so if we need to be part of these conversations and see how we can utilize these tools for storytelling, for building visual worlds, for offering cultural references that affirms our Black identities and inspire creation. We use the analogy windows, mirrors, and sliding doors in EC all the time. And so I'm uplifting this because everything else in society is a window for us. And I want to see these technologies and the things that we're utilizing as mirrors, and not just with windows. So to kind of put a bow on my thought, I'm going to leave with two things. Afrofuturism is about a lot of things, but for me, it's about healing, right? Its themes, whether it's resiliency, restoration, imagination, they already align with what we know about trauma responsive education. And we need to ensure that if we're going to heal, that we root it in our Afrofuturistic values that offers the emotional grounding, affirmations, and joy that we need, that we deserve. It's not something it's our birthright. You know what I mean? This is our birthright. And then the second thing is, Afrofuturism isn't just about the classroom or the learning environment or the office building or wherever you gather at. It's about you. It's about us. And so what liberatory practices do we need to reconnect to, so that we can reconnect with our own imaginations, with our own ancestral lines, with our own sense of power and possibility? Because when we engage in that journey ourselves, then I believe we'll be better able to hold space for others and support children in doing the same.
Thank all of you for your just thought-provoking, heart-provoking responses there, and bringing it back to the South, back to the roots, right? Like we're strengthening our roots through conversations like this and remembering, um, as Mike said, like the soulfulness of this. It's not just about the places, the classrooms, the processes. It is about thinking about our true connection. And it makes me think about our birthright to know, understand, and see ourselves a part of the earth. We are not separate from our other than human kin, are part of our ancestry as well. And so reclaiming our capacity to understand our connection to nature is an ancestral practice that we can also utilize technology for as well. And Afrofuturism helps us to dream about what does it look like to, in some ways, both decenter a human-only perspective of what's needed for the earth, while at the same time uplifting that we are preserving, we are connecting to the earth as a care practice, and that involves also caring for people. So I find that sometimes in environmental spaces, we start getting abstract and just talking about, the trees or the birds and yes, those aspects of our world are so deeply important to me. And what are we also talking about? We're talking about clean air and water for people. We live here. We're talking about the people who engage with these spaces and these creatures and waterways as well. And for our communities, there are so many specific connections to nature, and food is one of them that we kind of this group talked about a little bit before. These through lines between story, practice, engagement with land, engagement with ourselves. I think it creates this circle of support, but also remembrance. And so I want to kind of bring us into this space of talking a little bit about the stories and the pathways that are available from wisdom keepers and communities that show us what's possible in the future, right? Or what's possible from the past. Thinking again, like time is not linear. So thinking about the possibilities that open up when we engage with story and when we engage with ancestral wisdom. And I'll put that question here again.
Well, I was excited about this question, so I'll jump us off here.
Thank you.
So, one of the things when I started looking into nature-based education and what that was, I'm an early childhood educator as well. And so when I like to say I was liberated from my traditional job, I started looking into, my son was 5 at the time, and so I started looking into nature-based education because he had spent a year in kindergarten. He had just turned 6, and I was like, man, I knew, like I used to work in public school. I knew they only got, 15 minutes outside or whatever, but having provided him all these early childhood experiences that were opposite of that and in spaces that provided a lot of outdoor time, that was just kind of a hard pill to swallow. And so when the pandemic shut everything down, I was like, well, we'll just be outside playing, and that's what we're going to do. But I started becoming more curious about nature-based education. I looked into it, and of course, the space is really white. But like Benta, you were saying, the other thing I noticed, I was like, where are the conversations around people? Right? There were all these conversations about the plants and the animals and the importance of taking care of the planet from a conservation lens. But I was like, but the people, right? And what are our stories in connection to the people? And that's really how I birthed kind of the idea to that's what I wanted to focus on or bring to nature education or add to the field. And so I started very organically. I was like, volunteering in a community garden that's owned by a Black woman, and would go there once a week, and I'd take my son with me, and just hearing her stories and learning about that space. And I was like, oh, there's something here, right? And so then I said, what if we just gathered some other families and children? I ended up, deciding to homeschool him that fall, and I knew we needed community. And I said, Miss Pearl, what if we just show up here, once a week, gather some other families and children who want to just, be connected to nature, but, learn from other wisdom keepers basically in the community about different topics. And so we would explore all kind of things. It was, but I wanted to do it in a little bit different way. So I kept thinking about what are the skills that my parents and grandparents knew how to do growing up that, we really don't anymore, or that are now kind of colonized to be wilderness skills, right? And so, how you building a fire and who are the fire keepers? And how are you, we did one on like canning and how to, women come and share, Black women come and share about those traditions, and um, uh, fishing. There was this Black woman who's a wonderful fly fisherwoman. So I was also very conscious of who was telling those stories, right? That could debunk how we think about who gets to be something. So usually it's the fisherman, right? And so I was like, let me find a woman, a Black woman who's fishing. Not only was she fishing, she's fly fishing all over the world, right? And so we went and learned to fish from her, right? So these were very intentional people I was seeking out, but they were in community. And I would ask other people, who are these people, right? Who are these people with skill sets that we could be learning from? We did some drumming. It was a friend of a friend whose family raised them in this Afrocentric kind of culture in Brooklyn. That's how they grew up. But her family had spent time in Ghana, and her parents came back and was like Africa on everything, right? Like, so they grew up with a lot of African centric traditions. And that's, my son goes to her Montessori school now. That's very centered in that way. But for a project down here in South Carolina, I work with an organization called Tri-County Play, and we wanted to provide young children with um, we were saying access to cultural institutions, but we also said, well, wait a minute, who are these local wisdom keepers, and particularly in Gullah culture, in the Charleston area, sweetgrass basket making, right? So we had someone go into the child care centers and was doing little interactions with the children around like what it is and where does the sweetgrass come from. And then they were making things. So yeah, just kind of being really intentional about who these people are and what counts, like Mike was saying, as education, right? Creating these experiences is sometimes enough. And I think that's the hard part about defining or sharing my work with organizations who think they want to invest and they're looking for impact. And I'm like, we just out here experiencing stuff. I'm a trained researcher too, but I'm not about to sit here and give you surveys and all this stuff. Like, we're not doing that. Come experience it. You'll see the impact, and call me in 20 years and talk to them children about what did they remember. So I don't have, that for you. And I think that's the freedom piece too that comes in, where I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. You go figure it out. We'll show you some pictures. Here's the joy. That's the outcome. So, yeah.
Ashley, you made me think about some of the struggles I think that I've had in being somebody who was like super raised in the South, right? I tell my students all the time, I'm country, like swimming in ditches, walking barefoot down gravel roads, country. Um, but I think in trying to bring some of that within a more urban setting, when I ask folks to kind of reflect on their land stories, right, specifically Black land stories, um, there's always this hesitation, right? That pre-service early childhood educators have around, well, all my kids, we can't even go outside, in our neighborhood. So how do I connect them to nature, to the land? What does that look like? What is our relationship to the spaces around us? And I think that there's something to be said about remembering that the land has stories too, right? And how you connect to those um, in a lot of cases, especially within our urban settings, is going to be, I'm like, well, baby, you got to go out and talk to people, right? So there's a project that we do in our class that's inspired by Miriam Kaba and Essence McDowell's work around community guidebook, focused specifically on sites around the south side and west sides of Chicago that were important for Black women's history. But it asks folks to kind of go out and get those histories, not from, and Mike, this is not me bashing technology at all. It isn't. But sometimes folks become a little too dependent upon histories that Google provides, right? Instead of, well, sometimes you just need to speak to the people, talk to the folks who did the things, who know how to do the things. And that's where, some of this wisdom comes from. And as students starting to engage in that particular project of creating their own community guidebook, um, it was just fascinating that they were like, I didn't even know this about this neighborhood that maybe I taught in for decades, right? Or maybe I've lived in for at least a generation or two. But there's so much history there. And sometimes us trying to access some of those land histories and our land stories requires us to step outside of the history that has been captured a lot of times, right, by other folks and then sanitized in a certain way and presented as this is true. There's truth in untapped spaces. And so there was a quote from, in preparation for today, I went back and I read this essay by Mark Derry around Afrofuturism, and he states, if there is an Afrofuturism, it's going to be found in unlikely places, right? We can't keep going to the same sources to get those stories, to get uh, that background knowledge. We have to tap into um, our community elders, right? That we haven't necessarily seen as experts and knowledge keepers, right? But we have to tap into that because we know that they hold the history of the land around us.
Yes, I mean, so many things, Megan and Ashley, that you have said of we are all wisdom keepers in our own rights, even the children. Children hold an abundance of wisdom and vision, and that is often unfettered by what we as adults have come to know and experience that limits our ability to really harness the possibilities that we envision. There's always a, well, well, this is going to stop this, or what about that? And kids are like, wait, I don't even know that exists. I'm going to tell you what I want. And so the wisdom of our elders and our children and us being the keeper of our stories is so important. And even being communal, I think there's a lot of this rugged individualism that has really captured this idea of how you have to move and how the possibilities are yours and something for you to shape, as opposed to it being a communal activity, as opposed to this idea of collective liberation. I'm thinking of Ubuntu. I am because we are. The only way that we have those stories is by sharing them with each other, is by being intentional about who we are seeking out, whose narrative, even questioning the things that exist, the research that already, like from whose perspective, who said this is the way that it was? Where are the people? Why is it not taking these pieces and this parts? And how does it make me feel? Like our history should be comforting to us, should be something that gives us, yes, there's pieces of our history that are rooted in very dark and harmful and horrendous times. And then there's a beauty and a nurturing and a warmth of those stories. Even thinking about how those stories, one project we're focused on is around family, friend, and neighbor child care. And what is the true story of what that form of child care, what that form of care looks like in our community, is villainized for us. So the history for what that looks like for us, despite our deep connections because of not just chattel slavery, but across the continent of Africa, intergenerational homes and communal care and child rearing is a legacy that we've carried. But it's been bastardized in many ways to say like, oh, this is something that y'all got from slavery. And it's not. That is not our true story. And so we have to reach back into those true histories, into those true stories, uncovering the lineage of how we got to where we are and connecting that to where we want to be. So we are the wisdom keepers, and the stories that we hold from all of us are the key to that possibility. And technology of the future and the present and the past are important ways to take all of that, because we collect these stories and then they have to go somewhere and someone has to analyze them or put them together. And so technology is a helpful tool to be able to amass those stories for us, by us, because we need to have the power to put them together and to connect them to our present. So I really appreciate Megan and Ashley and hearing those different pieces about the wisdom keepers and who they are and how that works.
Thank you, Alicia. And it makes me think also about the structures, the frameworks, right? Like as we continue to collectively build something that is both ancient and new and futuristic, new frameworks go alongside that, and new, improved, but also, I would say maybe it's not improved, maybe it's refurbished is the right word. We're taking from the past when we're creating these new spaces to be able to hold the wisdom that we have. And so that's what I really loved about the Afrofuturism white paper from NBCDI is it's a way to uplift what's already there, but also put it in a form that outside of our communities we can share. So anybody here who's doing this work, you have something that you can go and use in a very practical way when you're going to funders, when you're going to other organizations, right? It's this basis, this framework, and I know Alicia put that in the chat, and thank you there. And also Megan, your work of this world building work, right? To me, that also is another kind of framework because what it does is it for educators who often want to be in on kind of in the on the sidelines, kind of in the back, it pulls forward there, especially Black women, Black lesbians, Black educators, to be able to show forth their wisdom, their caretaking, and then also how we do that with children, help them to learn how to wisdom keep in their own way with their own stories. So I just want to uplift everyone here. Of course, is a wisdom keeper, and you're all kind of creating these new frameworks. And to me, that is paramount for any kind of continued work in environmental justice. Your voices the voices of children, the voices of educators and advocates must be elevated for us to move in an authentic way forward. And so, Karama, thank you so much for being here. I was hoping that she would be able to share, but I'm glad that she was here. And this actually is a great point. I want to open this up a little bit. If you're here listening to us, joining, I would love for, and there's a question that resonated with you, or you have something you want to share, please unmute yourself, introduce yourself. Love to hear from you.
Good afternoon. I can unmute myself. Um, my name is Dr. Crystal Murdoch. I go by Doc. I appreciate being able to join this space. So I am a counselor educator and then also a clinician, so a fully licensed counselor here in the state of Illinois. A lot of my research centers around um, the commodification of the Black woman's body and identity reclamation. And so sitting here today was empowering and helpful as I journey to do that work as a clinician, working a lot of times with folks who've been historically marginalized, members of the LGBTQ community, and women, and I say women with an X, wanting to empower them, and the notion of recognizing history, but then also not wanting history to cloud the present or the future and what one is capable of achieving. So, how do you weigh it out? And so, again, I appreciate the invitation to join you all and what you all are doing individually and also as a collective. So, thank you.
Thank you, Doc, for being here. Yes, Margot, I think I saw you.
Yes, I apologize. I'm at my parents' house, was helping them, so background and everything. But I just wanted to come off mute and say thank you for this. I'm at that. I recently was trying to figure out how to, or if I should change my resume and my, making. Sorry, my nephew's here too. They're gonna hear babies. But if I should shift my resume to censored language, for lack of better terms, um, to get positions. Like I'm applying for jobs and I sent my resume to someone and they encouraged me to change my resume, shift the language because I'm applying to places that have federal grants and different things of that sort. And I told her I needed to sit in that because my vision is rooted in supporting Black children. So if I can't utilize particular words, is that really the place that I want to work or want to give my value and time to, right? So I told her I need to sit in that, go back and review my vision board, my focus, but just sitting in this room, in this space with people who are doing the work and who are thriving and saying what needs to be said and using the language that our wisdom keepers have given us. And it's is what my heart needed right now. It's what I needed just to hear. So it's kind of confirming, like, don't shift who you are. Stay strong. You can thrive in what you need to do and what you want to do. So I just wanted to say thank you for this space and look forward to thank you and just look forward to hearing from everyone else.
The irony of what you're saying and the shirt you're wearing, right? So walk in it, right? I think you're on the right track.
Thank you, Margot. And that's real right now. We're in a cycle of a lot is coming up to be seen, is how I'll put it. I wouldn't say that it's new, but I think that it's coming up to be seen. And so I deeply appreciate you sharing. And there is a lot of calls to shift. And I think answering that is an individual choice, but also we're building collective strength. And I also wasn't sure if I was going to talk about this, but I want to bring into the space too that the African diaspora has built so many strategies, we have built so many ways of knowledge, of ways of knowing that other diasporas can utilize if they are in right relationship with us. And so the work that we do and rooting even deeper into our cultural wealth, it does help other people, but we don't necessarily, so us doing that is not something that maybe our primary goal is not to do that for everyone. But if folks are willing to listen, to be in right relationship with our communities, to invest in our communities, there can be a lot of learning and shared learning that happens from other diasporas and people. And I think that that's something that um, can be said and should be said in the ways that feel right to all of us. So I'll just share that. And yeah, we're here together. And I hope this can be a space where if you are looking for an opportunity, if you're looking for your next move, I know there's a lot of shifts happening with jobs and with grants and with those kind of things. Please share that either through email or if in the chat. We're happy to share resources in that way. So yes, I want to see we have one more question, but I want to leave a little bit more space if anyone else wants to share or if there's anything coming up for folks. I see that Shannon shared in the chat that she really appreciate listening. And yes, she hopes she's able to bring seeds into her work. Thank you, Shannon. Well, I think the last thing I wanted to bring into this space is I would love to hear from folks around, for you, why is it important that we uplift children, family, and educators in environmental justice, climate justice, and I'll just say environmental justice and climate justice. Why are those voices important to you?
I'll kick us started on this one. Well, I've never been in an Antiguan or even a Caribbean household where okra wasn't served every Sunday, right? And my mom and all the old heads swore by it. They said it was good for everything, right? Constipation, high blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, everything. Now, I can't speak behind the science behind it, but that's what we went with, right? That was our truth in our household. But okra, as my mom explained it, it wasn't just, for her digestive tract. It was part of her education, her childhood curriculum growing up in Antigua in the 1960s. And this was before electricity, before television, before radios were even in every home. So there's one vegetable, I mean, it's no bigger than 5 inches, became a teacher for her. And through okra, she came to understand history, science, technology, engineering, math, and memory. She learned that the enslaved Africans who were forced to the Caribbean carried okra seeds with them. They tucked them into their hairs. They sewed it into their clothes. And it was a way of holding on to culture, a way to preserve hope. to say that we not finna be erased. And as they plowed and they sowed the fields, they planted those seeds, not just for food, but as a prayer, for survival, for strength, for something to nourish the bruised and battered bodies at night. And as my mom heard those stories from her mom, my grandmother, they weren't just passing time, right? They were passing knowledge. She learned how to tell when the land was ready for planting. She learned how to test the soil, which parts needed a little sprinkle of lime month before planting to balance the pH, how to make your fertilizer, how to make your own fertilizer from what they had in the backyard, because ain't nobody had money to go out and buy any, right? Cute story, right? I'm sure. But I always like to just pause and ask, what is she really learning there? Because she's learning about climate. She's learning about food systems, about ecology, about engineering, about economics, about the trauma of displacement, about the technologies of survival. She's learning how to design, how to problem solve, how to collaborate with the earth. She's learning through play, through story, through daily life. You know what that is? That's place-based learning. That's culturally rooted STEM. That's trauma-informed, land-connected, ancestral curriculum. And it wasn't delivered through a textbook. It came through relationships with people, with plants, with place. So when we ask, like, why are young children or families or early child educators central to conversations about climate and policy and public health? The answer is right there, y'all. Because children just don't inherit the future. I believe they're shaping it right now. Families are carrying generations of climate memory, of wisdom, and early child education, and us as educators, right? We're just the bridge between the two. We're the ones who make space for these stories to live, to be heard, to be played with, and then also to be reimagined. So, yeah, we need to be at the center of these conversations because we've always been holding that knowledge.
And I'm going to double down on my Ubuntu, that the importance of including children and families and early educators is because our well-being is collective, and our approach to change policy that addresses climate and the environment and health must be communal. Discussions that exclude or overlook young children and families, early educators, they're always going to be incomplete. It's going to fall short of anything that we need because their vision, their stories are not there. And we have to build that future not for children and families and early, but how are we again being communal? How are we building it alongside of them? But this will also require us creating pathways that not just allow, but really demand for the space for their contributions and their partnerships. And it's going to require some of that Afrofuturist thought of how we're shifting away from norms and practices that tell us that certain people hold the knowledge and that they have the power and the expertise, and they have the ideas. And so those shifts really must address, again, the rigidity of how and when and where those discussions happened and who they're with and who's involved and who is centered. Because be not mistaken, somebody is always centered. There is no, like, someone is always at the center. There is no all. So we have to really be intentional about those spaces where we are centering ourselves, where we are coming out and not being in comparison to other groups. And compared to this group, Black children are this, or Black families are that, or Black edu. But how are we whole and well and joyful from our definitions, from how we see ourselves? It's important for those metrics and measures to be included in those discussions and how policy shows up and what climate change looks like and environmental. all of those metrics and how we describe the wellness of our lives and what that connection is has to be incorporated. So without that incorporation and those conversations and those spaces being centered on us, we'll continuously fall short of that mark of the free and joyful futures and present that we know we deserve, our children, our communities, our families deserve.
I oh, this is rich. Oh my gosh. This is I'm my one of my favorite words, delicious. I'm just gonna stay there. How yummy this is. I I wanted to share and contribute because I'm just being so enveloped and just gathering, right? This is a huge space of for me of just harvest. So thank you for all the gifts you shared today. Um, and it's putting me in a place of reflection around climate justice, environmental justice, and sometimes in our work in community, um, these concepts can feel huge. They can feel overwhelming, where community members are not quite able to see their contribution. And so we start slowly, where initially quite a bit of the description of our program was nature-based. And we've pulled a little closer to home and have shifted from nature-based, though we are deeply nature-based, to nature embodied. So one of the first questions we ask folks is, what is one of your favorite memories as a child? And without fail, folks talk about something in nature, something with family, food, nature, gardening. So we start there. And for some of my own family members, where they're thinking about being in the Pacific Northwest and thinking about nature, particularly coming from Central Africa or the Caribbean, um, a big forest of dark fir doesn't feel safe. It's just not what they're thinking around. Oh, let's go ahead and take a hike. It's just not what brings serenity. And so, right, it's like safety, someone gonna take me. I mean, it's just not what feels safe. So we're saying, okay, how about we start in your own home? Then we'll get out to the garden, but just think about home. What inside your house? A plant, a memory. If you have an ancestral altar, what is your favorite plant? What is your favorite flower that you can bring? We'll just start there. And from there, there's then an opportunity to move into there are opportunities now to feed the soil with that plant that may need to be replenished on the altar, right? Or the food that gets into the composting. And then there's an opportunity to then move into the garden and open up that space of indigeneity, because the realization that we too are indigenous is often lost, right? It's just lost in translation. So we remind folks that there's an opportunity for us to be anchored in our own indigeneity, to belong, to honor ancestors in all their forms, our cousins whose lands we're on, but also what are practices that will continue to honor the stories that have lived before us, the stories that we're creating. And then, as I've mentioned, how are we becoming a descendants of wildest dreams, right? But really, really ensuring that folks understand, when I say folks, our community folks understand that they too belong. That from simple acts, right, of kindness towards their own home, bringing nature into their space is the beginning of cultivating that indigeneity. And this more personally shows up as, planting new fruit trees that are indigenous to the area, naming them, letting our community children know that 5 years from today, when you're in high school, you come back and make sure that you do some harvesting. So having them already dream around, oh my goodness, we are going to actually eat, right, the food that we've planted, having them imagine this forest, right, this food forest that they're planting. And hopefully that continues to lead into that space of honoring. Is, well, I guess we need to water the trees, we need to clean up, we need to remove the weeds, we need to make sure that we have some sort of symbiotic relationship with planting, the flowers, that the pollinators, and understanding how to actually move around some of the crops that we're planting. So it steps a little step at a time. I feel that sometimes folks are overwhelmed. Like, what can I do? Me, myself, N of one. What can I do to really contribute to environmental and climate justice? And that's a little bit of the conversation, and that's how we get started, and then there's a movement, from there that can further contribute to strengthening our storytelling. Anyways, wanted to share that.
There's just so much richness in this space, like you said. And I'm finding I don't really have many more words to say. And so I want to just highlight, I think the two things that come to mind is yes, remembering that we are indigenous to some place. And rooting us back into our indigeneity is so important. And the one thing that came to mind as I listened to you, Mike, and that beautiful, grounded story that you told, and Alicia and Sabine, is story is actually very central to the work we're doing here. I think that everyone here is in some ways involved in this process of story weaving. And so there's so many ways we can contribute, but simply sharing a story from your childhood or a story that you know from your ancestry is doing some really important work. Um, and yeah, starting with that can be beautiful. So I'll leave a couple more minutes open for if anyone else has anything to say. I feel full, and I'm so grateful for each of you here. I'll be sending out this recording as along with a resource that has links to all of these incredible folks' work. And yes, I'm so grateful for this conversation for each of you here.
Thank you, Bent, for holding this space. Thank you all. It's so great to hear thoughts and perspectives. These conversations are so affirming.
I want to echo Ash's thanks. And I'm looking forward to having a list of places that I already hear. I'm going to North Carolina, a couple different places in North Carolina, even to the Pacific Northwest. I feel like as everybody describes, they're going back home, to their home places, or places that we've cultivated as home places. There's this collective, that adds to our collective liberation, right? That we know that as we travel around these physical geographic spaces, borders are imaginary, borders are colonizers, dreams of what the world should look like, but they don't exist to us. So thank you all. This was dope.
Thank you, everyone. I wish you a wonderful rest of your weekend. And yes, be well.
Thank you.
You.